Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Lounge, a space for leaders like you to take a moment to pause, to think, reflect, and get a fresh perspective on the work that you do. I'm Katie, I'm your host, and I share stories and ideas from my 30 years of healthcare experience to help you manage the demands and the complexity of your roles so that you can feel hopeful and excited about the work that you do. So this week, Healthcare New Zealand, Health NZ, Te Whatu, lots in the news. And I'm not going with any of that. I'm going to stay focused on areas that are in your control, areas that a topic that can make a difference for you and the people that you work with. And maybe technically a little bit of whether it's distraction therapy, whether it's opposite world, whether it's that curiosity space of something completely different to just give you, like I say at the beginning, that fresh perspective. Sharing a story about a program I kind of binge watched a little over the weekend, I have to confess. So it's called America's Sweethearts. It was on Netflix, and it is about the cheerleading squad for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I am no sports fan at all, and I definitely have never been, and very unlikely to ever be, a cheerleader. So this was complete opposite world. I have no idea about this stuff. And I thought, let's just see. Well, completely mesmerised. Oh my goodness. So this podcast is not about cheerleading in any shape or form, though, that's an idea. What this series did was follow the selection process that they go through every year to get the new squad for the cheerleaders, and then the start of and then through the season. That's what they have through the football season of this cheerleading squad. But there was a part in it. I mean, it's just incredible. The work, the effort, the work, flipping heck. And there's a couple of women that is kind of like the coach and the leader and the choreographer. Oh, I can't say that. The one that does all the dance moves and stuff and teaches them that. So these two women, and they obviously care. They care deeply about the work that they do. They care deeply about the brand, and they care immensely about the girls, the women that join and are the cheerleading squad. But you go through, so the selection process is that you go through a kind of initial audition part, and then they get so many, and then this number, I think it's about 50 or so, go to what they called boot camp, and then they're learning the different routines and they're doing different stuff, and eventually they still have to whittle down to 36 people. And so they have to cut people throughout this boot camp experience. And obviously the longer they're there, they're getting to know people a lot more. They're forming all those relationships. So the longer it goes on, the harder it is to let people go. So we're watching, and these two women who clearly care a lot about the women, and they equally care about the work that they do. They take their job seriously, and it's a big part of who they are, and they've both been doing it for absolutely a long time. What I noticed was, yes, it was obvious they cared, but they really struggled to let the people go. When they'd made the decision who they were going to cut, they kind of get pulled into this room. And the way they told them, I was almost screaming at the telly, be clearer. And it reminded me of the very ineffectual form of giving feedback, which is fondly known as the feedback sandwich, where you have this very insincere, non-specific praise. Now, I don't think they were being insincere, but they'd often start with very non-specific praise about, you've been so good on the team, you're looking so beautiful, all of those kind of things. And then there'd be a bit of vague criticism around whatever it might be. And they would leave in this very vague sense around what was happening. So feedback sandwich, you get non-specific praise, then you get vague criticism, and then you get non-specific praise again at the end. And people kind of the people that need to hear the criticism will only hear the praise, and the people that need to hear the praise will only hear the criticism. So it's got lists of reasons why it's wrong, and that's what I wanted to explore about the feedback sandwich. But what stood out most was this idea about there not being clear, and the phrase that clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So despite the fact that they care immensely for these people, for these girls, and that they care about the work that they do and they care about the team, they were actually being a little bit unkind in this kind of almost painful way that they expressed, "I'm really sorry you've come this far. We're going to have to let you go because, as you know, we have to get down to 36. These decisions are hard." So getting it out, not that I would be a genius at this by any means, but it was painful to watch. And so that's what gave me the idea of exploring this week around this idea, the feedback sandwich. Now, this coincides with the fact that I've done a couple of workshops this last week where we've been exploring Radical Candor, which is a book by Kim Scott. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it already. If I haven't, that's quite amazing, because it is one of those books that is can be pretty life-changing when you're stepping into that leadership space. And it's on the list of books I wish I had read sooner, although I think I was a pretty early adopter of it. And it is probably the book I recommend the most to people I coach. And it is one of the books, it's been rewritten. I've just started rereading the new edition, and there's some really cool additions and different commentary within it. But equally, there is a podcast. There are an awful lot of resources on the website, so it's a phenomenal place to go and have a look. So the feedback sandwich, why doesn't the feedback sandwich work? So like you say, you've got this praise, criticism, praise kind of sandwich. It's all a bit vague. And like I say, it muddies the message. It's like, exactly what are you trying to say? And what bit am I supposed to be paying attention to in all of this? And often we can miss the mark of that. The other reason they list as why it's not particularly helpful is because it feels insincere. It's kind of like, do you really mean any of this? And often they warn that the feedback sandwich comes from our desire to be liked or to create false harmony. So rather than being able to just focus on the space of criticism that's needed, on the feedback that's needed, which is coming from a great place of caring for somebody, you actually come across as being a little bit insincere and I just want to be liked, and that's why I'm going to tell you some nice stuff. Thank you. The next reason why the feedback sandwich doesn't work is because it avoids the necessary discomfort. Now, when you get feedback, critical feedback, some spaces where you need to improve, be better, they are very useful. And the discomfort that comes from those moments is incredibly useful. Some discomfort is actually important for growth and change, they write. So it's almost like you've got to create, not that you're intentionally setting out to put people in a space of pain, but why would we move if we're quite comfortable? If everything's fine, why are we going to change? So you've got to create a level of discomfort in order to generate that change. I had been given feedback, some of the worst feedback I got, but it was the best feedback, I suppose, if you look at it like that. But the feedback that made me feel so terrible was around how I was showing up in a meeting and the impact it was having. And I felt crap. There was a lot of discomfort in that. But that discomfort was what enabled me to start shifting and thinking about it. And thinking about it differently. So avoiding discomfort is not a good thing. The feedback sandwich also wastes an opportunity for meaningful praise. Now, I am a big one for appreciative feedback. A big one. It's like the first thing I start talking to people about, really, and with teams around how do you give appreciative feedback to people? How often are you doing it? How good are you at doing it? Do you get really specific? So meaningful praise is really important. And a feedback sandwich is wasting that, because the bit of praise and the criticism and the bit of praise, those praise bits, when they are pulled out and really talk about what is working well and why, and getting more of that and letting people know that they're going in the right direction, that's so powerful. And you've kind of wasted that opportunity. The next reason they list as to why the feedback sandwich doesn't work is that it can create confusion. It's like, what am I supposed to focus on? Am I supposed to be focusing on this bit or that bit? Again, it's just adding to that idea of things not being clear around what am I supposed to do next. And then it also says that the feedback sandwich doesn't allow for proper processing. So a good feedback conversation, you need time to process the bits of information. So if you've been getting some feedback around how you're doing something or what you're doing or the impact of your behaviour, you need time to process that so that you can ask questions or you can reflect a little bit. But if you're shoving it in between two bits of insincere or slightly woolly praise, you haven't got the time for that. So again, it's making all of the things that you're trying to say pretty ineffectual. What are the best ways then to avoid the feedback sandwich? So definitely, and hopefully this is a bit obvious, is to separate praise and criticism. So have frequent impromptu conversations rather than the sort of like the very structured formalized ones, so that you can give timely, specific feedback, be it praise or criticism. You can base it in that moment. So separate the two things out and have them frequently and impromptuly. Impromptuly? Is that an actual word? I don't think so. Now, the key premise and the model in Radical Candor is to care personally and challenge directly. So rather than trying to soften the blow with this insincere praise, what you're trying to do is work out, how can I demonstrate that I am caring personally in this situation? Now, there's a lot of videos that demonstrate this really well. And I was working with some people and they talked about the impact of when you're trying to give feedback to someone who's not taking their breaks. So we were working on that. And so we explored, why are they not taking their breaks? So they clearly care about the work. So if you've got to give that feedback around someone not taking the break, go, I could see you really care about the work that we all have to get done. That's demonstrating that you caring personally. You know, there's good motives and intentions around the reasons why people are not taking their break. They don't want to let their team down. They want to do the best for the patients, all of that sort of stuff. They don't want to hand over things. So you can say, I can see that you care about the work that we need to do as a team. And then you can move in with the challenge directly. But when you don't take your break, you're going to put yourself at risk for making a mistake, and you're role modelling behaviour that doesn't support well-being, or whatever it is that you want to say about that. So you're talking about that impact of the challenge directly. When you don't take a break, this is what's happening. So care personally and challenge directly. And as we discovered in the workshops and in these conversations I've been having, it can actually help to think that through a little bit beforehand, so that you can get really clear on, okay, what is it that I need to challenge them directly on, and how am I going to demonstrate that I care personally for them? And then the next bit to avoid that feedback sandwich kind of loop is to be present for the emotions. So like you say, we need to reflect and think about what's going to happen, but equally, we're not trying to avoid discomfort. And so there's this great quote on their website that says, the act of being with each other as we manage difficult emotions is how we build trust, and that shared sense of that person really does have my back. So sitting with someone when they are managing difficult emotions is how we build trust. And if I think about some of the critical feedback I've had, the people that have sat with me while I have looked a bit grumpy and miserable and upset about it, I really do have a high trust relationship with. Now, they've got a lovely framework that they help for giving feedback. And they talk about it in now there's lots of models out there, right, for giving feedback. And so often a good one can be situation, impact, behaviour, or situation. Was it the other way around? See, I'm confused now. Anyway, you're talking about the situation, you're talking about it's behaviour next, sorry. There, unravel all of that. You can see I don't edit this, can't you? There, take it all back. Situation, behaviour, impact. And the one that they have in Radical Candor, they call core. So it's pretty much the same thing, really. So they're talking about the context. So they're saying, what's the situation? The O is for observation, which is describing what was said or done. The R is the result, which is the consequence to you or to them. And then the E is where you talk about the expected next steps. So that's, again, it's a very similar kind of model, but they all kind of wrap up in that same sort of space about talking about what's happened, what was the context for it, what was going on. So you're getting really factual. So you're talking about the behaviour, not the person. And then you're also talking about the impact. And I think it's the impact that can be really powerful when you're delivering feedback to someone. So the feedback part and the challenge directly, not really what these people in the cheerleading squad were trying to get at, because what they were doing was actually cutting someone from the team. And to be fair, they were all flipping amazing. I mean, it was particular details by the time they got to this point. These people could... it was exceptional what they were doing. So there wasn't any huge criticism in this. This was about, I suppose, if they wanted to get into the detail of why is it they were being cut, but often they didn't want to do that. And so I'm just curious as to whether that would help them or not. But what stood out really strongly was they're not being clear. There was another woman who was very desperate for a leadership role within the space. So they have team leaders within the different cheerleading, for the whole cheerleading team. There's different subgroups and there's leadership positions within them. And they were quite clear that she wasn't leadership material, and then they were not giving her direct, clear feedback as to why she was never going to get one of those roles or what she needed to do different. The poor woman was just floundering, really desperate. She had experience, all of these kind of things, but they weren't spelling it out directly to her in the conversations that we saw on the TV show. Okay, so I have to premise it with all of that. This was a TV documentary. I'm only seeing bits of it, but it was fascinating, and it did make me really remind me of how powerful being clear is and how kind being clear is. And I think we get that mixed up around kindness as being nice and everything's lovely, whereas actually, and this came out in the conversations, if we care about people and we want people to do their best and we want good outcomes and we want to develop people and we want their careers to grow, it is actually pretty unkind to not give them feedback that's going to help them. It's actually unkind to hold back or to cover up or to just smush around with some stuff that would be really beneficial to them. At the time, like we say, we don't want to avoid that discomfort. It might not necessarily feel lovely, but it is actually being kind. So there we go for this week. The delight and joy and the distraction of the opposite world of cheerleading in the American football. Is it American football? See, I don't even know what the Dallas Cowboys do, to be quite honest. There was very little about that, which is probably what made it quite interesting for me. But this whole team coming together, absolutely phenomenal. So great distraction and opposite world space for me to get interested into, but really struck by the power of clarity and that clear is kind. And that got me thinking about how we give feedback. And my first port of call nowadays is always around Radical Candor and having a check into this idea of the feedback sandwich, which is so often, well, definitely when I very first started, it was what was taught, for goodness sake, around how to give feedback, and really exploring. What we've explored is reasons why that feedback, that sandwich do not work. I don't know why I did that voice. the feedback sandwich doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? We've got a list of reasons there. And then what do we need to do instead, and how do we avoid that? So as always, I will put links in the show notes to these things in the Radical Candor website. Definitely worth checking out. Grab the book if you can. They've got a podcast as well. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can explore and get to know and get to grips with Radical Candor and what it can do to help you in this space as a leader or somebody who's working in healthcare, how you can start to give feedback to each other, how you can ask for feedback. And it's this concept of care personally, really important that we demonstrate that we care personally, and then how we challenge directly. Thank you again for listening to another episode of the Leadership Lounge. I am Katie, I'm your host. You can find out more about the work that I do. You can read the stories, ideas, and all the other stuff that I pull together on my blog, and you'll find that at www.katiequinney.com. You can sign up for the weekly email, and I am on a mission right now. It feels quite strong and quite determined. I'm on a mission to build a community of gritty, determined, hopeful, forward-looking people that are working in healthcare that know that the possibilities that are before us are far greater than the challenges that we're facing right now. So I'd love you to join me in that mission of building that community of leaders, because I know we can make a difference. Thank you for listening. Take care, have fun, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Leadership Lounge.